and welcome back to the channel. My name is Muriel, and in this video I will be going over the 10 worst works of fiction I've ever read across all genres. Last week I shared updated versions of all 3 of my top 10 favorites lists, but I had also stated in the very first of those videos that I had this year decided to add 2 other fun lists into the mix. This is the first, and the other will be a list going over my 10 all-time favorite fictional worlds. Before I proceed on to the list itself, however, a couple of disclaimers. This list is made in good fun, right? So please don't take it personally if you see a favorite of your own on it. I will go over the main reasons why these works did not work for me and, you know, offended my personal tastes, but keep in mind, my aim is never to trash any particular author or reader here. Also, you can expect a majority of the books I'm about to mention to have dedicated rant reviews on my channel, but I'll still do my best to point out when this is applicable. A note on the structure of the list: the works in 10th to 8th place are those I feel the least passionately about. I didn't like them or found them profoundly boring, but they're at the bottom of the list for a reason. The works in 1st to 3rd place truly are the worst of the worst for me. And as to all the rest, they basically sit on a lower but relatively equal level of dislike, frustration, or otherwise negative sentiment. Finally, you can count on the fact that nothing on this list will rise above a 5 out of 10 rating at maximum. First, I'll open the list with a dishonourable mention and cite James Tiptree Jr., aka Alice Sheldon's short story collection Her Smoke Rose Up Forever, which I first read in 2020. Tiptree's writing is considered part of the classic feminist SFF canon, which is why I decided to read this work in the first place, but unfortunately, her brand of feminism veers into very nihilistic, even black pill territory. Not that that qualifier was actually a thing back then, right? All of her stories, feminist and not specifically feminist alike, were rather depressing and repeatedly followed an overwrought sex and death thematic motif that really got tiring after a while. Still, I did technically enjoy the Screwfly solution, a horror story I found very tonally effective, and I did rate it with a 9 out of 10. So I can't say it was all garbage either, and that's why it's only a dishonourable mention. Onto the list proper now. In number 10, I have Naomi Alderman's The Power, a light science fiction and pre-apocalyptic story set in the near future, in which women realize they have developed an organ in their collarbones, called a skein, that allows them to harness bioelectricity. Given this gradually sets up women as the dominant sex class, this premise aims to examine what will happen when sexual power dynamics are essentially reversed. It's meant, I think, to be feminist literature, but quite frankly, I thought there was only surface level understanding of feminist theory displayed in the narrative. The characters, moreover, were all rather distasteful people, and the plot honestly felt incomplete to me. It was largely a case of unrealized electric potential with this one, in my opinion. Also, as a little addendum, I have started watching the TV adaptation of The Power, and it's alright so far. I'm gonna watch it until the end of season 1 to see if, somehow, I prefer it to the original source material. My number 9 is R.F. Kuang's The Poppy Wall, a very popular, borderline YA trilogy that transposes parts of Chinese, Japanese, and European colonial history into a relatively light, all things considered, fancy setting. Me thinking this series isn't particularly good and certainly overhyped is probably one of my biggest unpopular literary opinions. But there you have it. I freaking hated Rin. Straight up. The Poppy Wall's main character and sole narrative point of view, and didn't find her characterization particularly convincing either. I found the theming rather superficial and facile, the world building terribly underwhelming, and simplistic in its masked portrayal of real-world cultures and history. This is undoubtedly a series I should have DNF'd. No doubt about it. My number 8 is John Crowley's Little Big, a novel I read as part of my admittedly limited foray into the Fantasy Masterworks collection. I decided to read this one because it purportedly featured a magically liminal house and fairy shenanigans. The story does indeed feature the fairy realm, but only marginally so. Little Big is basically a painfully slow family saga with mild supernatural flavoring thrown in. The house wasn't really magical at all. The main characters were dreadfully passive, and going through this story felt like trudging through sludge. There was brief mention of memory palaces, a concept I do find interesting, but nothing much was ultimately made of it. I didn't hate this one, but it's undoubtedly one of the most disappointingly boring things I've ever read. My number 7 is look who it is again! Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun, a classic of science fantasy I read earlier this year, and for which I did my first rot review of the year as well. Which means you probably all kind of know what didn't work for me here already, but as a quick reminder, this is a work of male SFF genius my poor, little uncultured female brain simply couldn't grasp. I jest, of course. But the simple fact is, I didn't vibe with Mr. Horndog McPatty Sociopath. Sorry, I mean Severian. I didn't vibe with Mr. Wolfe's prose, nor the opacity of his narrative and world building. I was let down on the theming and incredibly frustrated, not to say irritated, by the story's conclusion, which I found objectively ridiculous. And I very much still stand by the opinion that this has no business being classed as science fiction, much less a classic of the genre. My number 6 is Ted Chiang's Stories of Your Life and Others, an incredibly popular collection of short stories amongst SFF readers, and thus another one of my biggest taste heterodoxies. I read this collection in 2020 and was floored by how much I disliked it. I found the writing incredibly dry, for one thing, and that most of the stories weren't even science fiction, as I had expected, which on its own could have been fine had I not also found most of said stories emotionless, nonsensical, rather pointless, and not all that clever. 72 Letters specifically was laughably stupid. Story of Your Life was incredibly disappointing given I'd seen and loved the movie adaptation Arrival, and Understand just felt like a Flowers for Algernon ripoff. That being said, one story titled Division by Zero did make fun of mathematics, so I'll give the collection that. My number 5 is Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, a very short novel and classic of English language literature, hence the Penguin English Library edition. The story follows a dude, can't remember his name because why would I, who goes down the Congo River in the good old days of European colonialism, looking for adventure, experience, and this one very charismatic surveyor, whose name I've also forgotten, who has gone native and set himself up as a tribal chief of some sort. I didn't get anything out of this. Or maybe I didn't get it because it's yet another work of male genius that went over my silly little female pleb brain. That's sarcasm once again if it wasn't bleeding obvious. I found the story opaque, boring, and ultimately pointless, given a specific plot point I won't spoil. There's supposed to be symbolism here about the depths of the human psyche, the male human psyche, but yeah, I didn't get any of that, so nope. My number 4 is Marina and Sergei Dyachenko's Vita Nostra, a novel translated from the Russian I first read in 2020 or thereabouts, and which I also found incredibly frustrating, not to say a teensy bit pretentious around the edges. It is entirely possible the translation didn't do this story justice, and I'll admit, I was somewhat taken in at first by the story's premise and rather oppressive setting. But I didn't care for the character work, and the way I understood it, the narrative and thematic linchpin of Vita Nostra relied on the magical translation, as it were, of a philosophical concept I simply, flat out, do not agree with and generally have little patience for. Additionally, I still don't see how this works as a coming-of-age story, given its ending, and given the copious amounts of unchallenged abuse it features. Like, for real, how is this a coming-of-age story? My number 3 is Susan Choi's Trust Exercise, a novel I read on a bit of a whim, again in 2020 or thereabouts, because I had heard it dealt with sexual abuse, consent, etc. in the wake of #MeToo. And if it does, it does so in the most convoluted, look at me playing around with unconventional narrative structures way possible. Okay, maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe there is a way to do this in an even more cringe-worthily experimental way. I don't know, you tell me. Still, because this is one of those experimental novels that features a story within a story within a story, changing points of view and unreliable narrators out the wazoo, I just couldn't give a crap about any of it. This, as far as I'm concerned, was a fat load of pretentious twaddle. My number 2 is Sue Burke's Semiosis, a novel that thoroughly pissed me off. Did I actually throw that one across the room? I think I might have. This story, told through a series of semi-related chronological episode chapters, features rich but abject morons and assholes who go on the most poorly planned mission I've ever encountered in literature to colonize a planet inhabited by sentient, plant-like organisms, including a bamboo-looking one named Stevland. I essentially expected this to be a kind of, Children of Time, but with plants, and oh boy, was I astronomically disappointed. The characters were horrid. I mean, they're all morons and assholes, like I said. The bamboo alien named Stevland was more akin to a magical dryad god thing than a convincing sentient plant, and the world building was poor, with basic scientific inaccuracies peppering the text left, right, and center. To top all of this off, there was also, yes, I am afraid, there was also cringy as fuck thirst content. Blech. And finally, the number 1 worst novel I have ever read, as of today, is Gretchen Felker Martin's Manhunt, which I read last year. This is a post-apocalyptic, sex hormone-based plague story that features trans protagonists trying to survive rapey zombie werewolves, as I dubbed them in my rant review, and a tephocracy. And yes, I still find that premise abjectly ridiculous. All the characters, goodies and baddies alike, were shite and little more than walking stereotypes. The writing, by and large, was artless and pointlessly edgy. The world building was hot garbage, and the theming, well, look, sue me, I guess, but I do not think that Twitter screening counts as actual theming. But, as always, you be the judge of that. More than that, however, this story was full, and I mean chock-a-block full, of gratuitous and hate-fueled porn, and, in my opinion, actual misogyny, lesbophobia, and yes, even transphobia. Ironically enough, I suppose. Manhunt, in my book, was genuinely obscene. Which, come to think of it, I guess is a kind of feat in and of itself, so kudos to it. There you have it. The 10 worst works of fiction I have ever read. I hope you found this list entertaining and or engaging. If you want to exchange thoughts and feelings about any of the works I've mentioned, you are more than welcome to do so in the comments down below, or on the channel's Discord server. There is a link for it in the description box as well. And on that note, I hope you'll have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support, and I shall see you all quite soon in the next video. But until then, bye-bye.